Welcome to Principles Only, the two-man version of Capitals Uncovered, and we're very happy to do these occasionally because we enjoy each other's company and exploring each other's capacious minds. And Martin is an expert on Shakespeare, and we're going to talk about Shakespeare today. And it's always very interesting. I mean, Shakespeare, this man who left school at 12, I think, the official Shakespeare, practically illiterate, created the English-speaking world's most incredible corpus of literature, plays, sonnets, love poems, and all the rest of it. So was Shakespeare really Shakespeare? Well, Martin, over to you, because it's a question that has intrigued scholars and investigative journalists for, I don't know, maybe hundreds of years. And the debate is still ongoing, so there must be a lot of evidence for both sides that Shakespeare might in fact be someone else who was disguised, who used the name Shakespeare as a nom de plume. So what's your take on it, Martin? Well, you start from the beginning, lay out the land, and tell us who Shakespeare was, really. I mean, a lot of you people know it by heart, but we've got a lot of non-Anglophone readers, viewers, who know who Shakespeare is. Everyone does, but don't know much detail.
Shakespeare is certainly the most prolific major dramatist and major playwright who ever lived in literate civilization. But Shakespeare's production of plays, sonnets, the insight in them is extraordinary. But many questions surround him. But I want to take the issue to him on him from a different perspective. It is extraordinary how many people, great writers like Charles Dickens, Mark Twain, so many others. If you look into that, I can, for a follow-up show, I can compile the list, but you can find it easily up on the internet. The number of serious people who are convinced that either Christopher Marlowe wrote Shakespeare, or the Earl of Oxford wrote Shakespeare, maybe Queen Elizabeth I herself wrote Shakespeare. There are so many skeptics that somebody who comes from Stratford on Avon, left school earlier, had no higher education, which was incredibly rare to come by in 16th century England, could master Greek fluently, could master Latin fluently, could understand the geography of Italy backwards. If his plays are full of he doesn't go everywhere. He doesn't appear to have been in Elsinore. Elsinore is just a place for him, and his Elsinore is a magical place. But when he talks about Venice, when he talks about Verona, when he talks about the cities of northern Italy, he knows them. He knows legal codes. He knows the principles of the laws of Venice. How on earth in 16th century England can you do that? There was no internet to look up. There was no Encyclopedia Britannica. Almost nobody could read. One of the reasons the theatre was so popular was that complex ideas and wit could be disseminated popularly to hundreds of people, arguably even thousands of people at a time, day after day in the city of London or the city of Paris, to people who could not read for themselves because they could not read, and therefore they loved the wit and sophistication of these plays, and they would come back to if you look at Faustus, the theology in Faustus is deeply profound. In The Merchant of Venice, if you want to know the history of England over the previous 300 years before Shakespeare, you watch the historical cycle. The plays are all based on Holinshed's chronicles. Today, scholarly historians will say, well, no, it wasn't like this, it wasn't like that, because we have much more research tools, we go into much more detail and sophistication. But in terms of a general knowledge, Richard III, killed the princes in the Tower, and the nation rose up against him when there was the Battle of Bosworth Hill, or the Wars of the Roses lasted for 40 years, and first the Lancastrians, the red roses were on top, and then the white roses of Yorkshire were on top, and all of this. All the detail, and Henry V conquers France, and here's how he did it, because he had the archers and the firepower. It's all in the plays of Shakespeare. It's all there. But this is written by a brilliant, literate, extraordinarily literate man. The plays are full of legal concepts. They're full of not just quotes from the Bible in English, which had only been translated into English 30 or 40 years before. They are written by someone who understands Latin, by someone who understands Greek. There are jokes about this there. This is an immensely sophisticated literary tradition. In 1623, by the way, another question. He officially died. Our Shakespeare, the legal Shakespeare, dies without question in Stratford in 1616. Why are the plays only published in 1623? You could argue, well, it took a long time to get them out. It's this and that. But he'd been retired for years. His last serious work is The Tempest, which comes out, I think, around 1610, 1611. There was plenty of time to get things in order. Why doesn't the collected works not come out until 1623? And some of the later plays show evidence of adaptation at a very late date. More just not decisive of anything, but in question mark. The whole picture was transformed in 1953 at a college in Cambridge that actually, look it up. I have my old man's blackout on specific dates. If we can look at the college which Christopher Marlowe attended as an undergraduate at Cambridge University, there was a painting made of Christopher Marlowe, and we will want it either on the show or certainly on the graphics after the show.
Yeah,
the painting was a curious painting. It's a very impressive painting. But if you put it side by side with the face of Shakespeare, not the Chandos picture, please don't use that. Use the face on the folio. But if you put the face on the folio alongside the picture of Christopher Marlowe, what do you see?
Right.
It's the same face.
Right.
It's the same face. But the painting of Marlowe was hidden. Mm-hmm. It was kept beneath another canvas, mm-hmm. and it was only discovered when renovations were being done in that college in the 1950s. Mm-hmm. Even then, most people did not take the obvious, because it's like theology, it's like politics, it's like the issues we talk about people being brainwashed and even wanting to brainwash themselves about what they believe about Russia or about America, about Trump, about Putin, about Biden. We make up our minds, we stick with what we have. The more people argue against it, the more we go into ourselves. So the image that Shakespeare must be Shakespeare, that he is a simple bumpkin who was a genius, and he comes from the theater of the world. Tell me, Pelly, did you come from having lady friends and having attractive girls of my own age around me? We sidetrack as usual. But the point is, there is no such thing as the university of the world. We learn from our environments. Alexander Solzhenitsyn was deeply imbued in communist intellectual scholarship and in the tremendous Russian literary tradition, and then later became a devout, passionate figure in the Russian Orthodox Church well before he wrote the great classic books. But the books also reflect his personal background. What does Solzhenitsyn write about? He writes about being in Gulag, in concentration camps. He writes about the Soviet Union as a gigantic cancer ward, and he himself had suffered from cancer and miraculously recovered from it. He writes one day in the life of Ivan Denisovich, and he had lived 3,500 of those days during his own decade in the Gulag labor camps. He writes what he knows about. Tolstoy writes some of the greatest novels ever written by anyone in history, certainly the great towering to Anna Karenina and War and Peace. And he's writing primarily about the great Russian sophisticated aristocracy, of which he was a part. That's what we write about. What does Shakespeare write about? He writes not just about ordinary working people, like watching an episode of the Sweeney or Z Cars, we're the salt of the earth, we're the university of the world, I learned this in the streets of Stratford. No, working class people are affectionate figures of comic relief and fun in Shakespeare. Shakespeare writes about kings, he writes about courtiers, he writes about wits, he writes about brilliant intellectuals. Where did he learn this? Secondly, the mystery which everybody recognizes in Shakespeare. He writes nothing till he is more than 30 years old, and then he produces Venus and Adonis, and all of a sudden he's up and running and he's producing genius works for the next 18 years, all the way through The Tempest. But there is no wind up. In baseball, if you watch a pitcher, they fly those balls much faster than they do in cricket, 95, 98 miles per hour, routinely cracked by radar clocks. And all the great pitchers, and all the lousy ones too, like me, but to be a pitcher in baseball, you have your wind up. You have to, have this weird, everyone that does it differently. It's usually weird, but you have to warm up. You have to wind up to prepare your throw at maximum speed. Writers are like that. In other words, he doesn't start with masterpieces. He has to warm up to them. Every writer does, yet Shakespeare doesn't. There is no warm-up period. When we see him, he's a Ferrari cruising along at 120, 180 miles per hour. But there's no acceleration. There's no warm-up. There's no first or second gear. How did he get there? But before there is Shakespeare, there is Christopher Marlowe, who is regarded as the greatest tragic loss, and understandably so, in the history of English literature. Because Marlowe is stabbed by an acquaintance of his. When I was discussing this in a seminar a few years ago, I got a point wrong that at least I can correct here. I said he's stabbed by a stranger. No, he's not stabbed by a stranger. He was stabbed by a fellow who was known. The incident is referred to, that the murder in Deptford, as the reckoning. There are some very good books that work on this. And the hand of the English deep state is clearly involved here. And there is no surprise in this, because it has been established by Marlowe's serious mainstream scholarship over the past 50 or 60 years that Christopher Marlowe was not just a literary genius. He was also one of the top agents of Sir Francis Walsingham and the Secret Service of England when it was fighting a ferocious secret war to keep Queen Elizabeth I alive in the face of Philip II of Spain, the Spanish Inquisition, and the Catholic Church's repeated efforts to assassinate her and put Mary, Queen of Scots, on the throne. On April the 6th, 1590, Sir Francis Walsingham, the M of the time, the head of the British Secret Service, what control was to George Smiley in John le Carré's novels, the man who for 20 years had directed the English secret state, dies of ill health. The ill health was real. It was a long time coming. Marlowe's greatest protector is gone, but his greatest rival and enemy, his bitter rival as courtier, a very famous man, Sir Walter Raleigh, is still there. And Raleigh has been involved in the same quote-unquote atheistic, heretical, magical, speculative, occult circles and plots that the young Marlowe has been in. And he knows how to pull strings. And in 1593, Marlowe is accused of atheism and also of sodomy, of homosexuality. And again, in England then, as in England up to the 1960s, double standards applied. What people did and how they engaged their own sexual orientations in private was fine, but you must never be caught out doing it in public, or be accused of it in public, or be convicted of in public. Marlowe is told that he has to appear before the Privy Council of England itself. He knows the charges are real. They're well documented. There will be many witnesses. He will be tortured to death. Sir Walter Raleigh and his friends have him. And what happens instead? We have the convenient murder by an acquaintance, not even a stranger, in the Deptford pub, May the 30th, 1593. And officially, Marlowe is dead. And yet there is no more plays from Marlowe, no more wonderful poetry from Marlowe. It is regarded that he's only less than 30 years old. He was born in 1564, significantly the same birth date we are given for William Shakespeare. One can wonder whether Shakespeare was really born in 1564 or whether the date was fixed after the event because it was Marlowe taking over the nom de plume of the real historical Shakespeare. who was a historical figure, but had no literary background whatsoever. His wife, the real Shakespeare's wife, was illiterate. His daughters were illiterate. He left no library. He left no books. He left no personal papers. He, he was a small-scale businessman running the Globe Theatre in London, which became successful. But there is no higher intellectual literary capability or documentation anywhere whatsoever for Shakespeare being literate or being capable of writing his plays, right?
Yeah.
And yet all of a sudden, within a month of Marlowe's death, the flood of Shakespeare's work begins. But it doesn't just that Shakespeare is writing. What is he writing? He's writing the way Marlowe wrote and nobody else wrote. He's writing on the themes Marlowe wrote about. He readdresses throughout his work Marlowe's early themes. He has the same obsessions. Marlowe wrote a classic historical play about a weak homosexual king who is horribly murdered, Edward II. And what does quote unquote Shakespeare give us? He gives us the classic Richard II, which is Edward II done right. He gives us the classic 139, is it more than 140 love sonnets? Again, expanding on Marlowean themes done right, expanded. Marlowe gives us Dr. Faustus, a terrifying story about a young magus magician who sells his soul to the devil and is totally destroyed by it. And it's filled with the most sophisticated and terrifying occult scholarship and references. And what do we find at the end of Shakespeare's career? We find The Tempest, a beautiful, haunting, poetic, cheerful play about an old magus, a Faustus who has abandoned the dark side and has embraced forgiveness, is still in the magics, is still a master of magic, but is now a master of benign magic, of white magic. It's Faustus revised, it's Faustus completed, it's Faustus done right. Marlowe gives us the Jew of Malta, a horribly anti-Semitic play about a diabolical Jewish criminal who poisons his own daughter and a whole convent of nuns as well. This is, Doctor Doom doesn't go so far in Marvel Comics. Only the Red Skull in Marvel Comics is as bad as the Jew of Malta. What does Shakespeare give us? He doesn't repent of his anti-Semitism. The Merchant of Venice is a deeply anti-Semitic play, but it's an anti-Semitic play written by a literary genius, and it gives Shylock a human dimension. The famous speech, does not you bleed? Does not you prick us? Do we not have blood? Does not you have feelings? This, that, and the other. It's all there. But Shylock is still loathed by the writer. Shakespeare's voice is heard in the courtiers who glorify Shakespeare's doom and downfall. But it's a different kind of anti-Semitism. It's a sophisticated anti-Semitism. It's an anti-Semitism by a man who is embarrassed, not by his anti-Semitism, but by putting it so crudely in the earlier play. It is the Jew of the Merchant of Venice, Shylock in the Merchant of Venice is the Jew of Malta done right. Then you have Tamerlane, an alien, terrifying conqueror, super macho of all, not Christian, a pagan, powerful, sexual, mighty, all-conquering force. And what do you have from Shakespeare later? You have such a force brought down to earth. You have Othello, the Moor. Now he's black, and he strangles his beautiful young white wife. No wonder Othello was such a popular play in the racist antebellum South before the Civil War. And it was. It's still the same obsessions and racism and hatreds, but they're written by a mature genius. Othello is very dark, but it is also powerfully dark. It is Tamerlane done right. And that's what you find throughout Shakespeare. And it is weird. You repeatedly find Shakespeare is obsessed with Marlowe. In fact, modern scholars using AI, of course, have analyzed the plays of Shakespeare and Marlowe correctly in the last 20 years, but they haven't gone far enough. They say, oh, Shakespeare stole so much from Marlowe. Marlowe was the real genius. Shakespeare keeps quoting from Marlowe without acknowledging him. Of course, he didn't acknowledge him. He didn't have to acknowledge him. He was him. He was him. But finally, and most important of all, what does Marlowe bring from his previous life as a spy for England? No doubt as a continuing spy, because he's still alive. He's still being protected by the deep state. He still serves Lord Burleigh. He still serves the cause of England, which he deeply loves. He is a deep patriot. What do we find in the plays of Shakespeare? We find innocent, when assassinations are committed, like in the Scottish play, when good King Duncan is murdered, there is a Lee Harvey Oswald moment. The new king, and there are reasons I will not pronounce him by name, the new king in the Scottish play immediately executes the two innocent men, the two guards, who are obviously the people who murdered King Duncan. It's a Lee Harvey Oswald moment. You got to have a patsy. And everybody accepts the plot. Everybody accepts the deep state plot, except one man, and he pays for it with his life.
Wow.
The Scottish, the successor, the man whose name leads the Scottish play, is asked, what did you do with these two vile murderers who killed the King of Scotland, who killed the king himself? I would not let them live a moment longer. I executed the vile creatures at once. Incidentally, in the Bible, King David does exactly that whenever anybody conveniently in line for the throne is conveniently bumped off. And there are always other patsies who are ready to take the chop. Marlowe and Shakespeare didn't even have to invent this plot. He could get it from the Bible. He could get it from the Old Testament, from the first and second books of Samuel. It's all there. But Macduff, the only guy with his head screwed on in the Scottish nobility, asks the security chief, who was responsible himself, about why did you kill these guys before we could torture them, before we could interrogate them? Wherefore did you so? And by asking that question, Macduff signs the death warrant of his own wife and children without realizing it, because he has made a fearsome enemy of the real king. Macduff must be killed as part of the cover-up as well. This is another aspect of the Kennedy assassination Shakespeare Marlowe understands. At least 200 people who had disturbing, conflicting accounts of what happened in Dallas on that day were murdered, died of natural causes in police custody, committed suicide when they had shown no sign of worry or depression, or were killed in bizarre accidents. They were systematically eliminated. And Shakespeare Marlowe understands this too. When you take over the state, when you assassinate the ruler, you must not just have a patsy, you must make the cover story stick. And that means killing more people afterwards. But there is more. In Hamlet, the most subtle and usually obtruse and strange of Shakespeare's plays about kingship, innocent men are manipulated again and lined up and killed. And letters there and in other works throughout are falsified. Information is falsified. Shakespeare Marlowe knows that the king in England and the kings in Italy and the rulers anywhere will routinely open up letters and find what is in them and then send them on their way, reseal them, or they will fake letters and send them as fakes to implicate innocent people. Now, this is exactly the way the deep state works today, but it is exactly the way Walsingham's deep state operated, especially when they were killing Mary, Queen of Scots. Who could know these things? Only someone in the deep state itself. There were no Edward Epsteins, there were no Seymour Hirsches, there were no Pele Nereth Taylors and Martin Sieffs to expose this or blow the whistle, like our friends Cynthia Chung and Matt Ehret and Jerry Theron. No. How did Shakespeare, who left school at 12, never went to university, but he learned everything he needed to learn, as A.L. Rouse said, that ridiculous, repulsive idiot at Oxford before my time, in the University of Life.
Oh, Martin, I mean, you've made a very beautifully this that Shakespeare the theatre owner with an illiterate wife and a very provincial background. He couldn't possibly have had the sophistication to write the kind of plays with their wall of mirrors like the intelligence agencies operate today, writing back in the 17th century. And Marlowe was as a classy man and so on, and he faked his own death because he was up for his arch enemy Walter Raleigh wanted to get him for sodomy, and he wanted to escape. Where would he have escaped to? Now I'm going to give some pushback. Not that I don't believe you, but others, of course. I mean, it's an incredible literary whodunit, and I'm sure you'll dismiss those arguments. But where, from your point of view, where did he settle? Did he live in England afterwards, after his faked death?
He clearly came back on occasions.
Right.
And there are echoes. I mean, he would have been a Count of Monte Cristo figure. The Count of Monte Cristo, who is believed to be dead, who finds this enormous fortune and wealth, comes back as a man of mystery. Nobody believes he's Edward Dante. He moves with ease at the top of Paris society, and he brings the very people who hated him to destruction. Just as by the end of Queen Elizabeth's reign, uh, once King James I comes in, he is much more sympathetic to Marlowe because he loves the Scottish play. The Scottish play is written to impress King James I, who is Scottish, who has a paranoid fear of witches, since he believed his mother was one, Queen Mary, Queen of Scots, and she was certainly a murderess several times over. It's understandable that poor King James had this terror. Freud would have loved to examine him. But the point is, all of a sudden, Marlowe cannot come back from dead. If he did, he'd be a dead man. The charges against him were made, they were real. But he can come back and visit England with impunity. But where was he? He appears to have spent time. Scholars have looked into this, Marlowean scholars. He spent a lot of time in Paris, but most of all, he went to Venice, and he spends 15 years in Venice as Gregorio, as the Italian minister on behalf of England, running the embassy of England in Venice, one of the two or three most important diplomatic posts in England, and one of the most important intelligence posts as well, from around 1607 to 1622. There was a lady, I never met her. I only discovered her work well after she died. Her name was Rebecca Ballantyne. She was American. She had a very fine education from Bryn Mawr, one of the finest women's colleges of the time in America. And before she died, she published a book called Marlowe Up Close. And I cannot independently verify it, because who can? But the argument she makes, she claims to have deciphered a lot of ciphers in Marlowe's writings and writing. And he certainly used ciphers, everybody knows that. But whether her interpretations are correct, well, that's another story. What I can say is I have been able to fact check her conclusions. And even where her conclusions are false at worst, they cannot be disproven. And at best, they provide much more credible explanations to some of the most important and puzzling aspects of English history that we did not know about. One aspect even fits with the execution of the Earl of Essex, which was so popular and is to this day that a movie was made about it. But in history, there's a mystery. Why did the Earl of Essex, who was certainly the Queen's favorite, first, why was he her favorite when he was a horse's ass, when he was apparently the son of the Earl of Leicester, who was her great lover? But he was also a loser who bungled everything he did. He inflicted a genocide on Ireland and in the 1590s, 50 years before Cromwell, and still managed to lose the war and left England in less control than before. Everything he touched, he messed up. He was an absolute loser, yet Elizabeth loves him. Why? And then he becomes pissed with the Queen, who is his great protector, and he declares a rebellion and says he's going to rescue the Queen from her own evil advisors. Now, unless you are the heir to the throne, this is insane. And as you know, the hereditary principle in English rulership is deeply established. Nobody could aspire to the crown unless you had a credible case for it. The only guy who was even remotely involved, and he had a credible case for it through the Yorkshire, through the Lancashire Red Rose Tudors, was Henry VII. If Essex was simply an eminent there are even theories that he was a paranoid lunatic, which he does not. He was stupid, but he was not paranoid. So why does he aspire to the throne? Ballantyne says because he was the Queen's illegitimate love son with the Earl of Leicester. So he was actually the Queen's son. So it was credible that if he seized the throne, he could do so with much better credibility than the son of Mary, Queen of Scots, who had actually been executed for treason, could do. And yet there was a coup in 1603, and it is the son of Mary, Queen of Scots, who comes into the throne. But what Ballantyne does is putting all this into context. But what she says basically is this man lives to 1622, and Gregorio dies in 1622 in Venice. But that will explain why the first folio comes out the following year in 1623, because the chronology and the sequence of timing from the death to the publishing of work that had already been completed years before and would have been set in type years before in preparation for this moment can move extremely swiftly afterwards, even in the slow reaction rates of 17th century Europe. So all these strange mysteries and anomalies are resolved. Ballantyne even argues that Marlowe, as Gregorio, as the minister in Venice, is happily married for the last 15 or 16 years of his life to the former mistress of
Okay,
the
Martin,
Gael
you've
in
lost.
Spain.
Sorry, you've lost me here. Gregorio
Sorry.
also Marlowe lived most of his years in Venice. That explains his great knowledge of Venice in the plays of Shakespeare. Um,
Yes,
okay, so the James the First wasn't actually the best candidate to be king after Queen Elizabeth died, because she had a bastard son. How does that relate to Marlowe's Shakespeare story?
because Marlowe jumped ship. Marlowe is totally loyal. This is the explanation of the ambiguities in Hamlet. The model for Hamlet was the Earl of Essex. The Earl of Essex is already dead when Hamlet is written. And Shakespeare clearly loves Hamlet, yet it's puzzling why he should. Because Shakespeare loves decisive kings who kick ass. His ultimate hero is Henry V. He
Right,
adores Henry
right,
VII because he has to be sweet with the Tudors. But
right.
Hamlet is not this kind of prince. Hamlet cannot make up his mind whether to go to the bathroom or not.
Okay,
Hamlet ought to be contemptible, and yet Shakespeare loves him. Oh, most noble, most wise, most perfect prince. Why? Because he had loved and fallen under the personal charisma of the useless Earl of Essex. And after Essex has failed and gotten himself killed by his own bungles, Shakespeare Marlowe is having to who does not have a total political mind, but he has been a courtier and he's been in the heart of all this stuff. He has to explain to himself why his beloved Earl of Essex failed, and Hamlet is his way of doing so.
right. So Hamlet is like the Earl of Essex,
Yes,
written up as a literary character.
yes.
Oh, all right. And then, but then, sorry. So King James takes over in 1603. What does that mean for Marlowe's life and career then? I mean, or
His
does he get
career
pardoned?
revives. It revives dramatically.
I
He
see.
cannot have a pardon, but the Queen's men become the King's men. The
Right,
King loves the plays of Shakespeare. He
right.
loved them even in Scotland when there were only terrible
I
Scottish
see.
actors
Okay,
with miserable accents.
okay. And that's when
Once
they
he
start being
comes to
performed, and
Yes,
then
he encourages them being
right,
performed, and more plays are written. Because,
right,
but of course, Marlowe, who has been a courtier, gets off on the right spot with the king because his first play after James comes to power is the Scottish play
right,
about an evil Scottish guy who runs afoul of witches, and he knows James is a paranoid terror of witches. James, in other respects, is a tolerant and
right.
enlightened man, but he burns innocent women as witches. He's in terror of them.
Hmm.
Again, Freud would explain it
Right.
to you.
But are James King James and Marlowe stroke Shakespeare in communication? Does James know Marlowe's real identity?
He doesn't
Shakespeare's.
appear to. We don't think
Okay,
so. He
okay.
does not appear to. But he, at the very
But
minimum, and he may do, but he
so
asks no
so Martin, sorry,
questions.
we've got 10 minutes left, and I've got to ask you some questions. Right. Well, you've made a very good case, and I'll sum up the counter questions. One is the real Shakespeare, as it were, the tobacconist's son, whatever, who was owned a theatre company in South London, the Globe. What was he doing all this time? I mean, was he in on this? He obviously really existed. I mean, or are you saying he was a kind of ghost? Did he put up with his name being used?
Yes.
Did wait? Let me finish. And did people? Did someone smuggle the manuscript through to him and then he claimed them as his own? I mean, was he in on it? Did he like Marlowe? Do we have an idea that he was kind of accepting this because he was doing it for the genius or the greater good of the country and for the theatre world? The second question is, if Marlowe faked his own death in 1593 in Deptford, um, there was a jury and there was a coroner who signed off on this. They must all, I know that the Kennedy coroner was a fake. So I mean, I can easily imagine this, but you must believe that. And secondly, well, you kind of answered the question already, but some skeptics say that Marlowe, if he lived in Venice, he couldn't have been as au fait with the developments in England as Shakespeare showed he was. So I'm just going to read up here that um, uh, Macbeth echoes the gunpowder plot of 1605. The Tempest draws on the real shipwreck in Bermuda in 1609. These are very specific, very London, very current references. So if Marlowe was hiding somewhere on the continent all those years, how did he keep up closely enough to write topical theatre about English politics without leaving behind a single letter, draft, or a messenger anyone has ever found? And then finally, um, let's see. People have analysed the text of Marlowe and Shakespeare, and they find that there's a branch of scholarship that analyzes writing statistically, word choices, sentence habits, the verbal fingerprints an author leaves without realizing. Supporters point out that this kind of analysis does detect Marlowe in some of the early Shakespeare plays, and they treat it as proof as the two men were one. But the same studies actually find two distinct fingerprints sitting side by side in those plays, which is why modern scholars now credit them as collaborations. So Marlowe and Shakespeare working together. So are there two hands? Did Shakespeare write some of his own stuff and Marlowe was just a collaborator rather than the sole author? So over to you, and this will be our final questions, and then we have to wind up.
Okay. You might have to, since you threw them all to me together, I may forget a couple, so
Okay.
you'll have to remind
All
me.
right.
But first of all, he very clearly did spend time in England, a lot of time, even under Elizabeth I, and certainly under James as well. And how? What are the indicators in the play that are very strong for this? They're in all the plays. Another of one of the most puzzling and strange plot twists that Shakespeare is obsessed with, and there's nothing about it in Marlowe. It hasn't happened in Marlowe's time, but when he becomes Shakespeare, he's obsessed with this. It's the Count of Monte Cristo theme again. Dumas got it from Shakespeare. An innocent man is wronged, accused of monstrous crimes he never carried out. He flees, he is regarded as dead, and then he comes back brilliantly disguised to bring down his arch enemy. You find it in King Lear. You find it with Viola. I think it is not 12th Night. You find individuals coming back as other individuals disguised as other people. It's a ridiculous plot twist. My English teacher, who was brilliantly literate, a very eminent man in his own way, Brian Bird at Belfast Royal Academy, used to make fun of Shakespeare. Shakespeare never comes up with original ideas. His ideas are bad ones and ridiculous ones, and he keeps repeating them. And I say, no, he keeps repeating them because he's obsessed with them. And everybody is obsessed with something or other. But why is he obsessed with the idea of men coming back to the court and nobody recognizes who they are? In the case of Viola, you even have a beautiful girl who comes back disguised as a boy and nobody sees it. You have the son of the Duke of Gloucester, who is framed by his monstrous brother for crimes in King Lear. Okay. And he comes back to the court and nobody realizes who he is. Why is this such an obsessive theme with Shakespeare? Because he has lived it himself. He has been back in England. He is spending a lot of time there, but he has to keep undercover. As to the relationship with the actual physical legal Shakespeare, it's very clear. The legal Shakespeare is many positions below Marlowe. Marlowe has been Cambridge educated, though he comes from a very humble background. He has been a courtier and mixed with the king and queen all his and with high nobles all his life, and regards himself as their equal. Ballantyne maintains that his great love, the Dark Lady in the sonnets, was actually Queen Elizabeth I's illegitimate daughter, and that therefore Marlowe, playing it very dangerously, is actually having a hot and heavy affair with the illegitimate daughter of the Queen of England for a long period of time as well. In any case, in the social hierarchy of Elizabethan England, here is this brilliant, sophisticated, witty courtier who is backed by, at the very least, strong elements of the secret state. And Shakespeare, even if he knows what's going on, which he may not, is being paid to keep his mouth shut, and he's being paid money, and that's all he needs. As to the lack of letters, well, of course not. He is traveling back himself. Secondly, he can maintain the flow through the diplomatic correspondence without revealing who he really is. Nobody has looked for Gregorio before Roberta Ballantyne pointed the finger at him. Nobody has looked for him in any Elizabethan archive anywhere. People are only looking for Shakespeare and maybe a ghostly presence of Marlowe, who nobody ever really believed in the first place. Look, people have been looking for 100 years to prove that the Earl of Oxford was Shakespeare, which makes no sense at all, because Oxford died around 1609, well before the last play comes out posthumously. And there's actually a marvelous movie made about this by a German director about 20 years ago, arguing the Oxford was Shakespeare case. And it's a fun movie. It's a great movie, but it is inherently absurd.
Martin, so a final question then.
Yes.
I mean, it's a lovely story. It's fantastic. It's persuasive. And as you know, I've studied intelligence agencies for many years. And of course, agencies existed before MI6 were founded in 909. And the English invented intelligence work. So it's all that's very plausible. And you've made a very good case for it. But if it's so interesting, why are people, most scholars, if you've got mainstream, and I don't trust mainstream particularly, but if you go into Wikipedia, they'll probably write Marlowe's conspiracy theory, Shakespeare is Shakespeare. I mean, it's 300 years ago, 400 years ago. Why would anyone have an interest in maintaining that Shakespeare is still Shakespeare? I mean, no one stands to gain. All his relatives are long since dead.
Yeah. Everyone stands to gain. It's like saying there is no God, there is no church. It's like saying communism is dead. This is a belief system, and the longer it lasts, the more stronger it becomes. It does not weaken with time, it strengthens with time. Was Professor A.L. Rouse at Oxford going to admit that all his life he'd been hacked, that he was an idiot? When we can look at this because we have not made our lives as scholars of English. We have not spent years writing PhDs and endless 700 and 800-page books on how Shakespeare is proof of genius. He comes from Stratford. In Canada, they have to change the name of Canadian Stratford. Stratford in England would go bankrupt. There would be an economic crisis. Everybody comes to England to see Shakespeare. This is the secular religion. It's a huge part of the soft power of the English. We should do a separate show simply on how Shakespeare is behind the rise of the British Empire, because Shakespeare teaches Marlowe Shakespeare teaches the English people to be sophisticated, even working class people. He teaches them to trade. He teaches them to lie. He teaches them how to look for the loopholes in documents. He teaches them how to be scathing lawyers.
So exactly. I mean, we said that the British,
all of this is in Shakespeare.
British invented intelligence work, and they're probably the supreme practitioners of the intelligence game, but they all got it from Shakespeare stroke Marlowe, so it's in their blood.
In the 20th century, if you want to be a great British writer, what do you have to be? You have to be a spy first. Malcolm Muggeridge, John
Graham
Greene, Graham Greene, a classic example. Somerset Maugham. Malcolm Muggeridge writes in his wonderful memoirs, Chronicles of Wasted Time, and we should do a separate show on that because it's such a wise and wickedly funny book that is so relevant to the lives of Indians around us today. Why? Because they had both been like Le Carre. What makes Le Carre one of the greatest spy novelists in history? One of the greatest British novelists of the century? He'd been a spook. And the point is, we all wear masks. We
Right.
all lie to other
Right.
people. We all lie to
I mean,
ourselves.
it's like Julian Assange said, we only tell the truth when we're wearing a mask. And the British are supreme actors
Exactly.
and
And I'm
supreme
a huge, like
spies,
you,
and
I'm a huge
that's what
admirer
they
of
feel most
Assange.
comfortable wearing a mask in a way, and being actors and playing a role, and that's their gift to the world, the British. But Martin, we really got to end there. So, is
Sure.
there a couple of sentences that you like to summarize? Maybe even use a quote from Shakespeare. I mean, like an Easter egg that Marlowe planted. Like, this is me. This I'm really here. Anything else?
Oh,
Just
he
summarize it
planted,
very, very,
he
very quickly. And
planted
like,
many, and it may have to wait to go on later, but you find it in the sonnets. I think it's sonnet 135 and 139. I stand to
I mean,
put thy will on. Here it is 136. Hold on. Make but my name thy love, and love that still, and then thou lovest me, for I am Will.